Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone wherever you are in the world, and for those who will be watching the recording of this session. Welcome to this ALS M&D Connect. We today are going to hear from some excellent speakers. We've got two neurologist clinicians and two research scientists who are going to talk to us about the current field in M&D ALS. I'm Nick Cole. I'm going to be host and moderating the meeting. Thank you for this opportunity. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, Biogen, for supporting us. Our next speaker is Professor Chris McDermott. He became a consultant neurologist in 2006 and is now the Professor of Translational Neurology at CITRAN, the Sheffield Institute for Translational Neuroscience. He's a consultant neurologist at Sheffield Teaching Hospital Foundation NHS Trust and specialises in M&D and neuromuscular clinics in Sheffield. And the focus of his research is evidence-based support and clinical care for people affected and living with motor neuron disease. And he's an experienced clinical trialist. Thank you, Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris McDermott. I'm a neurologist in the UK, and I'm going to give a talk entitled The ALS Clinic, Past, Present and Future. These are my disclosures. I'm going to split my talk up into three parts. I'll talk about multidisciplinary care, I'll talk about symptom management, and I'll talk about clinical trials. I'm going to, for each of these, look at where we've been, where we are now, and what the future might hold. First of all, multidisciplinary care. This is good for the individual living with motor neuron disease. It's better to see a coordinated team rather than seeing a lone practitioner. And this benefit is independent of interventions such as riluzole, feeding tube, and breathing support. So what is the X factor in terms of multidisciplinary care? What is that extra thing that gives that survival benefit? Is it that we're making sure that people get things that we know work in a timely manner? Is it that we're avoiding not doing things to patients that we know don't work or are harmful? Is it the provision of hope? Is it the positive attitude? Does that make a difference? We're uncertain, but we do know that when an individual has care from all of these people here listed in this circle, each tackling the various issues that people with motor neuron disease face, it does bring benefits. In the last year, though, how multidisciplinary care is delivered has changed a lot. It's had to because of the pandemic. What I'm going to talk a little bit about now is telehealth, and I'm going to talk particularly about the work of one of my colleagues, Dr. Esther Hobson, who's helped design our local telehealth service. So just to give some context, in the UK, M&D care tends to be delivered out of these highly specialised centres. People will often have to travel a long way to get to these centres, 200-mile round trip. That's very burdensome, that's hard for people, particularly later on in the illness. And so we've asked ourselves for a while, is there another way? So we set up a development process looking into telehealth, and we worked over a number of years with stakeholders, including patients, carers, multidisciplinary care team members, to come up with a new system, telehealth in motor neuron disease, to support our patients and help us to deliver good care. What the system does is it monitors individuals and improves contact between the centre and patients at home. We look at symptoms, we look at objective measures, we look at ALS-FRS, medical device use, and the well-being of the carer at home. The patient and care reviews are a bit like this. So when they first join the system, they'll get a message or an email which can come through as on a mobile device, a laptop, a computer, depending on individual preference. And this gives them information about the telehealth service and more information about their own type of motor neuron disease. Then on a fortnightly basis, they get questionnaires to fill in. So here in grey, you can see an informal carer questionnaire, a questionnaire related to ALS-SRS, and the questionnaire about weight. From a healthcare practitioner perspective, this is what they see at their end. So here, over a number of months, is an individual's ALS-FRS questionnaire answers. So the ALS-FRS, for those who don't know, is a functional score which tells us how someone with motor neuron disease is doing. And here you can see the ALS-FRS has dropped a little over the months, but in particular at the bottom you can see it is the respiratory subscore which has dropped the most. So on seeing this, the healthcare practitioner would get in touch with the patient and talk to them about problems they may be having to do with their breathing. Another example here, so this is a scores of questionnaire which picks up anxiety. So initially we can see anxiety score is quite high. This is not long after diagnosis. Anxiety is then managed and the anxiety levels drop. However, in August, early September, there's a peak in anxiety picked up by the questionnaire on the telehealth system. That enables a healthcare practitioner to make contact to see what's going on and introduce measures to reduce the anxiety and deal with the problems, and then we can see the anxiety levels have dropped again. So this is an example of how the clinical care team at the centre can keep an eye on what's going on with the patient in between clinic visits and react accordingly. So these types of telehealth systems, and ours is not the only one, there are great systems now set up in the Netherlands, in the US and in Canada, amongst other places. So what do? They improve communication between specialist care and people living with MND. They allow problems to be dealt with as they arise, not at predetermined clinic visit schedules. We're reducing the burden of untreated symptoms, we're reducing the risk from leaving treatable things untreated, and we're reducing the burden of coming to clinic. So people only need to come if they need to come. And we can also support carers using this by giving the carer time to talk about what's going on with them. So the pandemic, COVID, has led to new ways of working. Some of them are simple, so more telephone calls, for instance. Others are more complex, such as these telehealth type of systems. Some have worked, others have not. And I think at the end of the pandemic, we'll need to take a step back and really think about what's worked and why it's worked. And I doubt we'll go back to how we were before with a straightforward clinic visits. I think we'll have a blended, lower burden, inclusive approach to delivering multidisciplinary care. Multidisciplinary care is one pillar underpinning the treatment of motor neuron disease. There's also neuroprotective therapies such as riluzole and symptom control, and it's symptom control I'm going to talk about now. When a healthcare professional decides they want to treat a particular symptom that a person with MND is experiencing, ideally they'd go to the literature, and in the literature they'd find the evidence and recommendations. Unfortunately, for many of the symptoms which someone with MND will be suffering, there's a dearth of evidence to guide best practice, a black hole. These are some of the symptoms that people with MND face on a day-to-day basis. So, do we want expert opinion? Is expert opinion the best way to be managing these problems? We're going to take a little aside and think about how experts have managed things in the past. So this was a treatment in ancient Egypt for migraine. So the healthcare practitioner, fashionably dressed, would bind an alligator to the head of the migraine sufferer, who will be raised from the ground, and it was important not to forget the detail that the alligator should be chewing on a sheaf of wheat. That's all detailed here in the prescription. A little later, here we are in Victorian times with the expert management of syphilis in the day. So here the syphilis sufferer gets into an oven which is turned on, and mercury vapour is poured in, and the syphilis sufferer breathes in the mercury vapour to get rid of the syphilis. So this was expert opinion back then. Clearly, as evidence has evolved, we no longer treat migraine like this, and we don't treat syphilis like this. Fortunately for motor neuron disease, we are also moving away from expert opinion. So here we have non-invasive ventilation, proven intervention for supporting breathing in people with motor neuron disease, and we know that it prolongs life and it's good quality life. Diaphragm pacing. So diaphragm pacing was gaining considerable traction 5 or so years ago, and was happening globally really to support people's breathing with motor neuron disease. But it wasn't based on a strong evidence base. So we undertook a clinical trial of diaphragm pacing, and when we did that, what we found was patients who received pacing died twice as fast as those who were just receiving NIV. So this proved that diaphragm pacing actually was harmful. And this is an important reminder that we must do proper evaluations of treatments. We can't just assume that things are going to work, and we need to not be in the realm of expert opinion. There's good news in that there is a much more rigorous approach to symptom management. So these are just in the last couple of years, trials for mexilatine for cramps, Dexter for bulbar dysfunction, all showing benefits in properly conducted studies. So what might be the next sort of area of symptom management where we can make a difference? I think it might be nutrition. So we know nutrition is important in ALS. Weight loss is a poor prognostic factor. Mild obesity is protective. We know that there's something going on in the cells of people with MND, that they burn more energy. The cells don't work as efficient and they need more energy. That's called hypermetabolism. We know in the mouse model of motor neuron disease, here's the SOD1 mouse model, there's this similar problem with metabolizing energy. They have more energy needs. And if you correct the energy deficit in the mouse, so if you feed them more, you extend life by 20%. This is a study from a few years ago now of patients who had gastrostomy feeding tubes, and they were either given a high-calorie diet or a normal diet. And those in the blue and red who were given the high-calorie diets, they did better. So this was interesting, but the question that I then posed is, but what if we did this early on? What if we did this just after we diagnosed individuals, if we paid attention to their diet? We weren't the only people to have this idea. So this is Albert Ludolf's group in Ulm in Germany. They gave people a high-fat drink. In B, you can see that there was no difference between either group in terms of survival, whether they had the high-fat drink or not. In A, though, what we're looking at are fast progressors. And people who received the high-fat diet did better than people who didn't. So this wasn't proven, but it's further evidence that there may be a way of influencing outcomes depending on diet. So we want to explore that further, but we didn't just want to tell people to take more calories. We think we need to take into account someone's physical capability, the psychological capability, their opportunity to have a diet, and personalise how we support people in taking a higher calorie diet. So that's what this program we've put together, the High Calories program, exploring whether a high calorie diet can prolong function and survival in ALS. And we want to understand what it is that enables people to have a high calorie diet, then develop an intervention to support people, and then we're evaluating it, and we're at the evaluating stage now. So this is what we've developed. It's a web-based portal which is personalised to an individual. On the patient side, it gives them knowledge about nutrition. It allows them to self-monitor weight and diet. It gives them a personalised goal, and it gives them personalised resources to support them to achieve their goal. On the healthcare practitioner side, it gives them knowledge about nutrition. It enables them to monitor the patient's diet. It enables them to automatically use algorithms to set the calorie targets for a patient based on that individual and their function and their type of motor neuron disease. And that support will initially be a sort of food first approach, but will quickly move on to oral nutritional supplements. And it gives the healthcare practitioner support through our specialist dietitians and peers. So we've completed user testing. We've gone through 2 years of development of this with patients to get it right, and now we're about to start our trial. So hopefully we'll have the results soon. So in terms of evidence-based practice for the symptoms in motor neuron disease, we're in a much better position than we were a few years ago. And there's much more work going on. So there are studies looking at gastrostomy now, psychological interventions, saliva management and quality of life. So, there's reasons for optimism in terms of symptom management. For the last part of my talk, I'm going to focus on clinical trials. It's been very disappointing that in over 23 years, over 40 trials, only one definitely positive, and that's Riluzole, back in 1996. Clearly, we need to be doing things different. And just mentioned TriCals. So TriCals is an international initiative, Europe, Canada, Australia, people coming together to think about how we do trials differently. And the TriCals initiative involves this concept of a highway to therapy. And on this highway there are several lanes, and we need to address problems in each of these lanes. We need to make changes in each of these lanes. And at the heart of it all, it's about treating the patient as an individual and finding for that individual patient the right type of study for them, dependent on them and their ALS. So finding subgroups, and that's the first lane. And it might be that we use biomarkers to identify different types of ALS to allow us to put the right patient in the right trial. We need to design trials differently, and I'm going to focus on that in a second. Then we need to integrate the trials with all the different information platforms we have and make that more efficient. And then the outcomes that we use need to be better, need to be smarter. We need to perhaps use biomarkers again, which can give us a readout within months about whether a therapy is working or not. And very importantly, outcomes need to be meaningful to people living with motor neuron disease and understandable. So I'm going to just focus on one of those, and that's clinical trial design, and talk about innovation in this space. So this is the traditional approach to clinical trials over the years. So here's 4 trials here, each separated by a few years. So we're looking at 10, 15 year timescale here. The first one started 15 years ago, trial 1. It was set up, staff were recruited, staff were trained, the trial happened, trial finished, staff leave, training skills are lost, infrastructure withers away. A year or so later, another compound comes along, trial 2 begins. Staff need to be trained, infrastructure built up. Trial happens, trial finishes, staff leave, skills are lost, infrastructure withers. So for each trial, things are being rebuilt each time. This is extremely inefficient. So one of the innovations in the last year has been the commencement of a number of platform trials. And platforms have a number of different advantages. A key one is that they share planning, setup and infrastructure. You only need to do it once, and then you've done it for all of them, and it remains in place. Another key advantage is that you can share a placebo arm. So rather than having each of these treatments having its own placebo, it shares the placebo, so far fewer patients need to take a placebo. Now we have a saying in England that you wait hours for a bus and then 3 come at once. And that's very true of platform trials. So as well as the TriCals initiative, the Healy Centre have started a very successful platform. The M&D Smart in Scotland have also started a platform. So hopefully these new designs for clinical trials will bring much faster results. So what might the future look like? Hopefully all patients will be offered the chance to go into a clinical trial if they want. The trial that they go into will be personalised to them. So they get a compound which makes sense for their type of motor neuron disease. Once they're in a trial, the assessments will be low burden, perhaps done at home. We'll minimise the number of individuals that need to be on placebo. Studies will be much shorter. We'll use biomarkers to give us earlier readouts. We'll have platform infrastructures, so when new compounds pop out of the drug development pipeline, they can quickly be trialled. And consequently, trials will be cheaper. So we'll be able to test many more drugs at once and faster, which will bring us, hopefully very quickly, to a future where the world is free of ALS. I'd like to acknowledge my mentor, Professor Dame Pamela Shaw in Sheffield, the rest of the Sheffield M&D team, Esther Hobson, who's done a lot of the telehealth work with me, my collaborators within TriCals, in HiCals, and the UK Clinical Trials Network, as well as all my funders. Thank you very much.